So let's dive a little deeper into these stages, okay? So in stage 1, you obviously get seed growth, then you get rapid cellular division and expansion. Most of the final berry size is really determined by cellular expansion, and I'll show you why in a second. You also start accumulating a bunch of acids at this point and phenolics. And so if you've gone out during stage 1 of berry growth, so when the fruit's still green like this and hard, everyone should experience this at least once in their life. Go out and taste one of those developing berries. They are foul, right? They're extremely acidic, and they're extremely bitter, okay? I remember when I was a kid, tasting a developing grape berry, because I was out in the vineyard and just thought oh, grapes are sweet. Put it in my mouth. They are not sweet. That is gross, okay? And then during this stage, you're accumulating a lot of flavor precursors, which we'll discuss a couple major classes of flavor precursors in this lecture. On my YouTube channel, I have a whole lecture on flavor and aroma and how we can impact those things in the vineyard. So if you're interested in that sort of stuff, you can check out the lecture on the channel. That's an area of research and application that I'm particularly interested in. Right. So, yeah, stage 1, it lasts about roughly kind of more like 50 days. Right. It takes about 50 days-ish to get to stage 2 to lag phase, so to the end of stage 1. But different for different varieties, right? So for Concord, which is what's considered a Labruscana grape, right? So as you probably remember from other courses, so we have Vitis labruscana, or Vitis labrusca, rather. So Vitis labrusca is native to the United States. Concord is not a true labrusca, it's labruscana. So about a third of Concord, the third of the genome comes from Vitis vinifera, right? Concord being the major grape that you see like in Welch's grape juice. There's a ton of Concord being grown in Washington State, as well as here in New York State, right? But Concord is a bit quicker from fruit set to stage 2 to lag phase, a bit quicker than Vitis vinifera, okay? So let's talk about what water is doing during stage 1, all right? Water relations is incredibly important for grapevines. In most places on the West Coast, people need to irrigate in order to grow grapes at an economical yield, right? Of course, not so much in the North Willamette Valley, because in the North Willamette, we get like 49 inches of rain, roughly, a year, and we have deep clay loam soils with a lot of organic matter. So the water holding content, water holding capacity is quite high in those soils, so we get all that rain in the outside of the season, but our soil doesn't really dry out to depth, okay? But in anywhere else you go, if you go to Southern Oregon, all down in California, up in Washington, you're pretty much going to have to irrigate to keep stuff at an economic yield, right? Notice that I say to keep stuff at an economic yield, to get your yields right for money, okay? It's not that you have to irrigate in Walla Walla. You don't. Does that blow your mind? You don't. You don't actually have to irrigate there. So think about the center of Spain. So think about La Mancha, right? So La Mancha is a really big grape growing region. They don't irrigate in La Mancha. They get less rain and it's hotter than Walla Walla, okay? So what they do is they grow head train vines, head train vines have a lower evapotranspirative pull on the water in the soil. So they require less water to grow. They have lower yields and their spacing is very high, like it's very wide. So it's like kind of like 8 foot by 8 foot. Like the vines are very spaced out, so there's zero competition. There's nothing on the vineyard floor. There's no weeds, nothing. So the yields are incredibly low there. We don't do that here because we wouldn't make money doing that kind of thing. They can do that there because they've owned these vineyards for generations. They own these things freehold, the economics are different for them than for growers in the United States. Okay? So let's talk about stage 1. So like I said, the final size of the berry is really determined by cell enlargement, not by cellular division. The reason is cellular division really isn't that impacted by like climatic conditions or environmental conditions. But cellular enlargement certainly is, because what enlarges cells is water, right? So water is imported and it's stored in the mesocarp vacuoles, right? So in the vacuoles of the cell, in the meat of the berry, it's where the water is stored. And 99% of the mesocarp cell is basically vacuole by like mid-ripening, all right? So the more water that you put on during stage 1, the bigger your vacuoles are going to get, the more cellular enlargement you're going to have, the bigger berries that you're going to have down the line. Okay? But yeah, so by veraison, about 90% of the berry is water. It goes down after veraison because of the loading of solutes, like sugars, right? So by harvest time, about 75 to 80% of your berry is water, right? Which is why we have this kind of conversion. It's roughly, for every kg of fruit, we get about 0.6 to 0.8 liters of juice, or about 143 to 190 tons or gallons per ton of fruit. Okay. Normally we just cut that in the middle. We just say kind of, it's like 150 gallons per ton. Okay. But this kind of depends on where you're growing and how you're growing fruit, and then also how you're pressing, right? The conversion from dry, from harvest weight to juice yields is gonna differ greatly, right? Like in New Zealand, when we were doing Sauvignon Blanc, making Sauvignon Blanc in Marlborough, we're getting closer to 180 gallons per ton. Huge extraction, right? Also, they're irrigating in Marlborough. To be honest, many of them are irrigating beyond evapotranspirative demand. So they're kind of over irrigating, kind of at luxury consumption. And so those grapes are pretty plump when they're coming in. And then they're pressing them relatively hard as well to get as much out of there as they can. So the juice yields are much higher in Marlborough than like what you might experience in a typical winery in the Willamette Valley. Like in the Willamette Valley, generally you're going to be getting about 150 gallons per ton out of Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay. Okay. So yeah, 75% of the water influx comes from like pre-veraison xylem influx, right? So you're getting most of your water into your fruit during stage 1, and it's all coming really from the xylem. Essentially, and this is kind of an oversimplification, but essentially the xylem connection to the berry shuts off at the end of stage 2. Okay. But yeah, this is, the xylem is highly responsive to water deficits. So when we do things like regulated deficit irrigation, which you may have already heard of in some of your viticulture courses, it'll definitely come up at some point if you haven't heard about it yet. RDI is really the most common irrigation strategy in the warmer, drier regions of the United States. So yeah, in sort of the higher quality, higher tier side of things. So what you're trying to do with RDI is you're trying to keep the plant keen during from bud break to bloom, or through bloom. So the vine's not experiencing any kind of water deficit in that period. And then you try to induce a deficit during stage 1 of berry growth. Stage 1 and stage 2 of berry growth, roughly. And the reason for this is there's a few reasons. One, it's to save water, right? We exist in a time when droughts are more and more common. And yeah, will seem to be getting more common over time. So we're trying to save water a bit. But also qualitatively, it does a lot of things. So when you induce the deficit during stage 1, you can upregulate genes that encode for like proteins that will then go on to make positive secondary metabolites, like some phenolics and some flavor precursors, right? So you'll get more in terms of flavor and mouthfeel when you put the vine into a deficit during stage 1. You'll also decrease your vine size a bit, right? You'll diminish vigor, which can be great in some regions. I would love to be able to do that here in the Finger Lakes. We have gigantic grapevines here. So it'd be nice to be able to drop it down by using water as a lever to pull, but we can't do that here because we get about 4 inches of rain, 3 to 4 inches a month during the growing season. Yeah. So we'll put the vine into a deficit, and the xylem will respond. The xylem water flow will respond, so that the xylem flow will decrease. Less water will get into our berries, right? It'll upregulate those genes, but it'll also simply make a smaller berry at the end of the day, right? So you're getting concentration of stuff because you're getting a higher skin to juice ratio. All right, you're getting smaller berries. Then, once we get into veraison, that xylem connection is essentially severed, right? Again, oversimplification, but that's basically what's happening. So then you just turn the water on again, and you try to get the vine kind of out of the deficit, and again, keep it keen till leaf fall, because you're just trying to keep the leaves on the vine so that you can ripen your fruit up, but also so that you can build carbohydrate storage over the winter. Okay? Cool. So yeah, let's look at some flavor precursors. Like I said, this is really what I love talking about, researching and playing with in the vineyard and playing with in the winery. So if you want to look at I have a lecture in more detail about these things, and you can go on my YouTube channel and find my varietal aroma lecture. Okay, so let's talk about methoxypyrazines. So what are they? These are the vegetal aromas. And the reason I'm talking about MPs is because we've studied them a lot. And we've studied them a lot because they're important in Cabernet Sauvignon, which is the #1 grown Vitis vinifera in the United States, and I think also in the world, in fact. Like Cab Sav and Chardonnay are kind of our 2 most important Vitis vinifera globally, but certainly here in the States. So they've gotten a lot of time spent on them with research. So these vegetal aromas, they can be positive at low concentrations in some wine styles, right? If you've ever had Cabernet Franc from Loire Valley, from Chinon, that's often kind of vegetal, and they kind of like it. They're kind of into that, right? In the States, that's not kind of our wine style generally, and that's generally not what our consumers want. Our consumers in the U.S. typically want sort of fruitier styles of wine. And then at high concentrations, it can certainly be a flaw. So you don't want your wine to just smell overpoweringly like green pepper or cut grass or something. You don't want it to be so green, right? No one likes vegetables. Even vegetarians are they're just kidding themselves that they like the vegetables so much. I'm kidding. I eat a lot of vegetarian meals now. So it's important in some varieties, not really all varieties, but some, right? So all those Bordeaux varieties like Cab Sav, Cab Franc, Merlot, Sauv Blanc, which is a white Bordeaux variety, and Carmenere, which is kind of the lost Bordeaux variety. Carmenere, interestingly, y'all might know Carmenere from Chile. The reason it's in Chile is because they ordered, and I can't remember who it was who did it. It might have been Aquitania. In Santiago. It was one of the wineries right near Santiago. They might have been, or maybe they were the one who identified this problem. I can't remember. Anyways, people imported Merlot grapevines from France. They planted the vines, and then they were kind of looking at them going yeah, this does not seem like Merlot. And what it turned out to be was Carmenere, which they used to have a lot more Carmenere in Bordeaux than they do now. So now Carmenere represents like 0.1% of the total acreage in Bordeaux. There's like a very small amount of it, more for curiosity's sake. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So yeah, these are the two major methoxypyrazines here, IBMP and IPMP. They both essentially smell the same, kind of bell peppery at high concentrations and earthy at lower concentrations. Yeah. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but you can notice their detection thresholds are in the parts per trillion range. So the detection thresholds are, these things are very powerful compounds. The pathway for methoxypyrazine synthesis is not really that well understood. We reckon it starts with like leucine, isoleucine, or valine, and then the amino acids are amidated, and they condense with a dicarbonyl. In this case, it's glyoxyl. And then, so you form this, when you do that condensation, you form a hydroxypyrazine. And then this is really the only step that we truly know. This is all kind of theorized in the back here. But this step here, we definitely know happens. So there's a methylation with this methylation transferase. There's methylation of the hydroxypyrazine into a methoxypyrazine. Okay, the biosynthesis of varietal aromas is not clearly understood generally. So let's talk a little bit about what happens with methoxypyrazines during ripening, right, during berry development. So what happens? So methoxypyrazines you'll find in anything vegetal, right? It's the vegetal aroma. So anything green is going to have a bunch of methoxypyrazines in it. So this is like the beginning of berry development. This is like fruit set back here. And then you're seeing methoxypyrazines increase. And then here is veraison, right? So they pretty much just reach their maxima at veraison, and then they degrade during ripening, all right? So go up, and then the clusters are green, they lose their chloroplast, and then the methoxypyrazines start degrading, okay? Water status can impact this as well. So in general, putting a vine into a deficit during stage 1, doing regulated deficit irrigation, can lower your concentration of methoxypyrazines. Why is that happening? Well, probably a lot of it has to do with vigor attenuation. So if we can get the vigor down, we can get more heat and sunlight on our clusters, and that can help us get less biosynthesis and greater degradation, which is exactly what this slide is about, right? So heat degrades methoxypyrazines. So initially, during stage 1, if you put a lot of light on the cluster, that'll help decrease the biosynthesis of methoxypyrazines. And then during stage 3, if the cluster is warm, it'll help speed up the degradation of methoxypyrazines. So this is why pulling leaves, like if you're growing Cabernet Franc in the Willamette Valley, there's a very high chance that it's going to be on the greener side of Cabernet Francs, especially when compared to Cabernet Franc in California. The reason being, in the Willamette Valley, it's going to be much cooler, right? So you're going to get less degradation of the methoxypyrazines than you would in California. So pull leaves, right? Pull leaves, get more light on that fruit during stage 1. You'll accumulate less methoxypyrazines, and then once it changes color, right? So it's going to go to red or like black fruit, and then that fruit's going to heat up higher than ambient because it's absorbing more infrared radiation, and then that's going to help degrade those methoxypyrazines and make a wine that doesn't taste like bell peppers. Okay. So yeah, like in cooler climates, you tend to have more methoxypyrazines, and your trellising method can have a major impact on methoxypyrazine formation and degradation. Right, so if we look at these things, so this is head trained cab in California, and this is some VSP Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand, right? So let's just say, let's say this is all Cabernet Sauvignon, right? And this is all being grown in New Zealand, okay? So we have VSP and we have head trained. Which vineyard is going to have the most methoxypyrazines, right? It's going to be the head trained stuff because this is more, the fruit in here is more shaded, right? So you're getting more biosynthesis because you don't have as much light on the fruit, and then you're not degrading as much because the fruit in here is going to be cooler than the fruit here, right? So then why do you do this? Why does anybody do this head train cab in California, right? It's because in California, in some parts of California, it gets incredibly hot. Like just the other day, it got in LA, it was like 112 or something, or 20. It was some absurd number. I think Napa was 112. So getting some shading on that fruit is very important there. Okay. I'm going to skip past this because it really has nothing to do with berry development, but you can get Methoxypyrazines from other sources, like the multicolored Asian lady beetle, which you all have in Oregon. We have it here too. To be honest, it's not a massive problem. All right. Now, the second, and this is the last flavor compound I want to talk about with relation to berry development. So neurosophenoids. So there's a bunch of different neurosophenoids. They do a lot of things. They have a lot of different kinds of flavor impacts, ranging from like floral, like violet, to also kind of like cooked, what am I looking for? Cooked fruits. Beta-damascenone, though, interestingly, there was research done in France that kind of suggests that beta-damascenone, even when it's above the aroma threshold, may not actually have a direct impact on wine aroma, but rather act as like essentially like MSG, like as a flavor enhancer. So it kind of uplift like esters in the wine. Kind of fascinating. I saw that in one paper suggested, and I haven't really seen any work validating that. But then you have these really kind of special ones down here, these special neurosophenoids, TDN. If y'all have ever had Riesling that smells kind of kerosene-y, strangely, interestingly, there's quite a few Rieslings in Oregon that are on the more kerosene-y end of the spectrum. But that's kind of where that comes from. The gasoline aroma is from this neurosophenoid TDN. And then TPB is this interesting one that's kind of floral and can go all the way up to like a geranium insecticide type aroma. You really see this more in Simeon, especially in like Sauterne. It gets pretty pronounced in there. So yeah, so you will experience wines that smell like pure gasoline, and that pure gasoline smell is TDN, the neurosophenoid, which the precursor for which starts getting formed during stage 1 of berry growth. Okay, so in the chloroplast, right, in the berries, so when the berries are green, they have chloroplast, right? So the berries are actually photosynthesizing. In there are things called carotenoids. So carotenoids are considered accessory pigments. So if you expose chloroplast without any kind of sunscreen type thing, if you expose it to just the sun, the chloroplast you'll create all these free radicals, and they'll start destroying the cell membranes and all this stuff, and nothing will work right? UV and stuff is super gnarly. Sunlight is gnarly. So our plant needs to protect itself. And one of the ways that the chloroplast does it is using these pigments. And these pigments are kind of orange, red, kind of yellow pigments that absorb light outside of the range of the chloroplast, right? So the chloroplast, as you should remember, absorb in a maxima in the red and the blue wavelengths. And then these carotenoids will absorb outside of that, okay? Then what happens, right, during veraison is the chloroplasts break down, and at veraison, they change from green to red or to yellow, whatever, more translucent. And when the chloroplasts break open, those carotenoids will get just inundated by radiation, and then it'll start degrading into neurosophenoids. Fun fact, these are carotenoids. So when you see the leaves change, which you don't really see so much in Oregon because it's pretty much evergreen. But of course, here in the Northeast, we see this change. And people take these incredibly boring drives to go watch the foliage change. It's absurd to me. But that's what they're seeing, right? So they're seeing the chloroplast degrade in the leaves, and then these pigments, these oranges and reds and stuff, those are carotenoids. Carotenoids are also the pigments that you find in tomatoes and in carrots. Beta-carotene is a carotenoid, right? So this is what it looks like. So this is basically right here is like the start of a rhizome. So carotenoids reach a maxima right at veraison. So like you're accumulating more and more carotenoids during stage 1 and stage 2, and then they degrade once those chloroplasts go away. And then they turn into neurosophenoids. So this line here is the neurosophenoid line, and you can see it's basically the inverse of that line. Okay? So this is something to be aware of because you can build up carotenoids by opening up a fruit zone, right? Again, leaf removal. So during ripening, yeah, neurosophenoids increase, like I just showed you, with water status in general, putting the vine again into a deficit, doing like RDI, and putting it into a water deficit during stage 1, can increase your carotenoids, not only because you're attenuating growth, attenuating vigor, and probably getting a less dense canopy, getting more light onto your fruit, which then actually upregulates when you get more light on the fruit. So of course there's going to be like photoreceptor proteins that are then going to be like, "Woo, we're getting some light, right? Let's upregulate like a gene over here that's then going to code for a protein that will synthesize some of my photoprotectants, like the carotenoids." Okay. Heat and sunlight, yeah, more sunlight in general, like I said, more carotenoids, more neurosophenoids. This may be a reason for, like in Riesling, this may be an argument for why you might not want to pull leaves so severely in Riesling, because you are going to increase the carotenoids in that Riesling, and TDN is a carotenoid. Okay, heat speeds up the degradation of carotenoids. So in warmer regions, you'll typically get more carotenoids. So if you compare like some Australian Rieslings to Mosel Rieslings, you're going to find that those Australian Rieslings are going to be more on that kerosene side of the spectrum because they're grown in just hotter climates. Nutrition as well has been linked to neurosophenoid formation. In general, it seems that TDN decreases when you have juice that comes in with higher YANs. I don't know. The research here isn't super clear, to be honest. And this might be the reason for the linkage here between the high N in the juice and the lower TDN, maybe because those vines were higher vigor, and there was more shading in that canopy. I think I pulled this out of, there was like one paper where they actually looked at this. And botrytis and things can also increase your neurosophenoids. So when you dry grapes out, when you make things like Amarone, when you make like Sauterne and the Simeon gets concentrated by the botrytis, then you're gonna get those high concentrations of TPB, right? That gives you kind of that geranium floral thing. All right, so let's talk about acids in stage 1. What happens with acids? Acids reach a maxima. So acids are being synthesized from fruit set until veraison, and then basically right before veraison is when they reach their maxima, and then malic certainly starts to degrade. It gets metabolized, right? So this is malic acid concentrations here. This was, I believe, in Australia. Yeah. So it's Shiraz. The treatments here don't really matter. Don't really look at that. But you can see, so veraison's like right here, right at the tip. I mean, it makes sense, right? So you get malic acid increasing, and then it starts degrading over time during veraison, after veraison. Tartaric acid looks a little different. So you get an increase of tartaric acid until veraison, and then it kind of just stabilizes. There is a small amount of metabolism of tartaric acid in the grape, but really not so much that it matters. So essentially, you can just think tartaric acid goes up until you get to veraison, and then it's just going to flatten out. Okay. So, and I'll talk about why malic acid degrades after veraison in a bit. But do know that these kinds of acid profiles of a grape are going to differ by variety, right? So here we're looking at Palomino, which is the green, and then Chenin Blanc, Cabernet Sauv, and Tinta Cao. But Palomino there's Palomino down there. And on the y-axis, this is malic acid concentration in milligrams per berry. Palomino is well known for retaining its acidity. So is Chenin Blanc. And so you can see that there, right? So some grapes are going to be different in their ability to retain acid in warmer and different climates, right? A very famous one in Virginia is a grape variety called Petit Manseng. Petit Manseng is famous in the foothills of the Pyrenees, so in like southwestern France, kind of at the border, like Andorra and Spain. There's an area down there called the Jurançon, and they make some really lovely semi-sweet styles of this wine. They also make some great ones in Virginia, like I said. But Petit Manseng holds on to acid like crazy, which is why they make semi-sweet styles of wine. So when you get to you'll be at like 21 Brix. It's a white grape. You get to 21 Brix. Typically with most white grapes that we're growing, when we're at 21 Brix, our TAs are like 7, 8, right? With Petit Manseng, your TA is going to be like 10 or 11. So very acidic. So you got to let that hang to actually balance out the acids. Okay? So now let's talk about phenolics. So a lot of phenolics are being formed in stage 1. Color doesn't start to really get formed until stage 3. Okay? But these other things that contribute to astringency and bitterness and some of the antioxidants start getting formed during stage 1. So I'm just going to talk about tannin. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on phenolics. You guys are going to discuss those more in other courses or other classes within this class. But tannin, aka proanthocyanidins, which is an incredibly hard word to say. But tannins are formed from fruit set, and then they go and they reach a maxima in concentration at veraison. So that's what this is here. That's actually what you're seeing here. This is like looking at the various. Let me get out of the way. This is looking at like the various subunits. Don't worry about this, but you can just look at these bars as this is tannin concentration in milligrams per gram, and then you can see this here is the start of veraison, right? So it reaches a maxima, and then the tannin concentration actually decreases during ripening. So